How long can the Utah football team continue to win without Cam Rising and Brant Kuithe? And how does the Utah defense match up with the Baylor offense? And pretty well. We're talking about that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. My name is JT Wistcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the Utah defense and how they match up with the Baylor offense. Also going over some Utes who were honored for their week one performances. But first, got to start with the health and availability of Brant Kuithe and Cam Rising, because Coach Whitt was asked about both those things in Tuesday night's media availability, and once again declined on Brant and said Cam is progressing well, and that they're not going to clear him unless they feel like that he's ready to go, basically. And look, we're not going to know if he's cleared unless unless one of the media members gets a hold of it and they break it a little bit before the game. That's the only way we're going to know if Cam's going to play. Maybe we'll find out like an hour before. Like if Cam's dressed out, that's obviously a decent sign, but we saw just last week a Junior Tafuna, right? He dressed out and didn't play. So that's where these things can all kind of become very interesting and murky overall. But the question then becomes, because we don't know when we're going to see Cam Rising, we don't know when we're going to see Brant Kuithe, who coming into the season we probably consider the two best players on this Utah football team. We don't know when we're going to see him. So how long can the Utah football team continue to win without their top two players? Well, the answer might surprise you, because it's actually a decent length. It's more than most teams could definitely win without their top pass catcher, and especially without their top quarterback. But that just speaks to the depth overall of this Utah football team and a pretty favorable start to the season in terms of their schedule, right? So first of all, first we should break down this Utah offense and the Utah team and why I feel confidently that Utah can win, at least for the next couple weeks, without Cam Rising and Brant Kuithe. Well, what did we just see Utah do against Florida? We saw the quarterbacks who were in the game were part of the reason Utah won, but they were not the reason Utah won. Utah only scored 7 points in the second half. If you originally had told me that going into the game, I would have been pretty nervous that Utah only had 7 points. In fact, I thought in this game Utah would get up to 30, and I thought the Gators would be able to score and have more success overall. And we'll get to the reason that those Gators did not have much success inside Rice-Eccles Stadium in a moment. But overall, you have two quarterbacks, in my opinion, with two different skill sets that present problems for defenses, and they are supported by a still really strong group of pass catchers. Devon Vele is a very good college football wide receiver 1 overall. I think he's very solid in that regard. Money Parks is capable of making big plays. So is Emory Simmons. So is Micah Pittman, he had a bad drop last week, but still capable of making those plays. You have 3 really good running backs, even 4. I think Chris Curry can contribute too. So you have 4 really good running backs, and you have an offensive line that has overall 4 guys with starting experience over multi-years. Because remember, Kump did start for this team back in 2021. So 4 guys with starting experience. 3 of those guys started last year in Kump, a guys rotated in. And a left tackle. And you have a left tackle in Spencer Fano and Tongai too, who's getting some kind of feel for it in the experience overall. But you feel really good about 4 of the guys you have up front based on how they looked in week 1. Then you move so that's how the offense is a very solid offense that can beat you in multiple ways with one of the best offensive coordinators in the country, in my opinion. Then defensively, what does this Utah team present? Well, one of the best defenses in college football. You have a pass rush that has multiple guys who showed flashes of being able to get after the quarterback consistently, whether that's Van Fillinger, another guy too, and Jonah Ellis, of course, with how he looked in week 1. Logan Fano showed some signs too. And, Connor O'Toole has been called by Coach Whitt the best pass rusher on this team, and we expect him back in the near future. So that's another thing that bolsters this. A Utah defensive tackle group that should be getting Junior Tafuna back in the near future. Simote Pepa should be back. But even if they don't come back, how good was David Fotu? How good was Keanu Tanuvasa? And we know how solid Liki Vaimahi is. So a very good defensive line that an SEC team and an SEC team like Florida, that's supposed to be a middle-of-the-road SEC team, couldn't get the run game going again. So that's a pretty good sign. Linebackers with starting experience, Leavani Damuni and Lander Barton both did their thing at a pretty high level in the Pac-12, especially Barton towards the end of the season a year ago. And, Corene Reed's going through the concussion protocol, but he's going to be back soon as well. So it's a strong linebacker group. And then when you look at the secondary, Cole Bishop, Sione Vaki, one of the best safety pairings in the country. And Utah's corners are really good. I know there's no Clark Phillips, as you guys all know, of course, who's listening to this, but JT Broughton, Zamiah Vaughn, yeah, they gave up a couple of yards late in the game. That was garbage time. And guess what? It's college football. You're going to get beat once or twice. But what I care much more about is that they did their job for the majority of the game. There's a reason that JT Broughton got brought up by Coach Scally as spotlighting for how well he played. The Utah defense played outstanding. This is a really good college football team that is not defined by their quarterback and tight end. So they are going to be able to continue to win, especially when presented with this schedule. So let's talk about Utah's upcoming game, shall we? First, going to Baylor. We're going to talk about in the second segment. Baylor was a mess against Texas State, and I don't think, especially the more I've watched their game back against Texas State and the more I've thought about it, I don't see how they're going to beat Utah just with all the issues they have to correct. And it's going to be a quarterback making his first ever collegiate start. He's played reps before and got some, and even played against Texas State. This defense is a whole nother level, even with the heat and everything factored into it. Sawyer Robertson is not Anthony Richardson, and Anthony Richardson had a lot more experience even when he took snaps than Sawyer Robertson does, who has only attempted, I think it's a combined 24 collegiate passes in his couple years he's been in college. So that's where I just think that poses a lot of problems for Baylor. We'll talk about it more in the second segment, especially because there's other matchups that Utah is going to be able to take advantage of against that Baylor offense. But so that's the Baylor game. You feel good about that one, even though you're going on a road just because of the state the Baylor team is in right now. Utah's going to beat Weber State, obviously. Then the UCLA game. Look, Utah is really good at home. UCLA still breaking in Dante Moore. They had to change quarterbacks because Ethan Garbers was struggling a little bit, threw a couple of those interceptions in their game against Coastal last week. Look, every time that UCLA has traveled out to Utah, at least in the last couple of years, it has not gone well for them. And I don't think that's going to change this year. I think the Utah defense will have a dominant performance against Dante Moore. I don't see Dante Moore in this UCLA offense being the team that hands Utah their first loss at home, first true loss since 2018, even if Cam Rising and Brant Kuithe aren't there. So I do believe Utah, just because they're a better team, better overall roster, they're playing at home, and I think Bryson and Nate are really going to be comfortable. I still expect them to beat UCLA even without Cam and Brant, just because of the state that UCLA is in as a program this year as well. If that was not Dante Moore, but DTR coming in and Zach Charbonnet, I'd be much more nervous. But based on what I saw in week one from UCLA, they don't scare me right now, and I think Utah will be able to beat them too. But this is where things get interesting, right? So I just laid out 3 games where Utah can play without Brant Kuithe and Cam Rising and win, right? I don't see how I shouldn't say it. I see how it's very unlikely that Utah can go in without their top pass catcher and without their star quarterback and win at Oregon State. Corvallis is one of the toughest places to play in the conference. DJU looked really good. And we've been saying this a lot on this show throughout the offseason. Clemson had a lot more issues than DJ Uiagalelei. And that played out on Monday night, where Clemson still looked like a mess, even though they had Klubnik in there and Garrett Riley and all these other things going on. Clemson was still messy, and DJU looked good. Some of Clemson's problems last year were DJU's fault. But I think a lot of people said, oh, now that he's gone, they'll be better. No. You're seeing play out now. Clemson had a lot more issues than just quarterback play on last year's team. So, yeah, DJU, I think, is a very good quarterback. Their Oregon State team is very good, and they're very good at home. Utah is capable of going in there and winning, even with Bryson and Nate rotating in and no Brant Kuithe. But it's just going to be a lot harder. And I think that, I said, I would only give Utah a 20 to 30% chance to win in that environment, because it's something that Cam Rising, even when this Utah team in 2021 was clicking, that was the only true loss that version of that team had, right? Once Cam was at the helm, they lost in Corvallis. I think this Oregon State team's even better than that one. So you need Cam and you need Brant in that game. And of course, even just like looking beyond that, just as a general view of the schedule, you're going to beat Cal with Bryson and Nate starting, of course. But then after that, the USC, the Oregon, the rest of the season slate, you need Cam and Brant. So I think if those guys set up for the setback or something and they couldn't come back until October 21st, then Utah would win every game outside the Oregon State one. I truly believe that. So it's going to be interesting to see. I do not think Cam's going to be out that long. I think we'll see Cam at the latest against UCLA. I still probably think that'll be when we see him. And Brant, I don't know. I'm not sure if we'll see Brant until the Oregon State game or if we'll see him after the bye. Don't have inside information on that. Just the way Kyle Whittingham talks about this stuff, and he doesn't really elaborate on injuries, but he doesn't sound very encouraged about how Brant's recovery. Just he's speaking a lot more about a little more positive, or giving more insight, I should say, on Cam Rising's recovery timeline than he is about Brant Kuithe. So just as a person who's viewing and listening to this, I take it that Cam is closer returning than Brant Kuithe. And that's why I said I feel like Cam will come back against UCLA. He probably could come back against Weber State, but why would he? And for Brant, maybe he'll be able to come back in 2 weeks, but just based on what we're hearing, I'm not sure he will be able to come back until the Oregon State game rolls around. Maybe the UCLA one. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And one thing I'm really excited to see is this Utah defense against this this Baylor offense this coming Saturday. I think there's a lot of matchups that really favor Utah, and I'm going to talk about those matchups in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to the My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. Also want to encourage you guys to check out the Locked On College Football Kickoff live show each and every Friday. That goes on from 11 a.m. Eastern time to 1 p.m. Eastern time. So a nice 2-hour show. They do a great job breaking down the biggest stories in college football and previewing what's going to be a great slate of games each and every Saturday. So that'll be this Friday. Make sure you guys tune in and check that out. And I know one thing you guys are definitely going to be tuning in and checking out is the Utah Utes taking on the Baylor Bears this Saturday. Tough game down in Waco on paper originally, right? Because we all thought Baylor was going to be better than what they showed in week one. And what they showed in week one was a mess. Their week one performance against Texas State was so bad, in which they lost 42-31, that it put Dave Aranda on the hot seat. It sounds like, talking to some people at Baylor, his seat was slightly warm coming into the season after the disappointment that was, you're a top 10 team last year and coming off a really good first season, but then top 10 team last year, you lose at BYU, and just the rest of the season spiraled from there. And then you go into this year and you lose to Texas State. It sounds like it really cranked everything up. And, if a team like Utah comes in there, and Utah's going to have a chance to beat them pretty good. I think that this game, I don't think they're going to blow them out. I don't think this is going to be like a 30-3 game or something, because Baylor will play much better than they looked against Texas State. They're going to play much better. They're going to be more motivated. But the problem for Baylor is going to be the opponent is a lot better too. And I think that's where they're going to struggle overall. So let's talk about the matchup a little bit. First, you have to talk about Baylor's offense. Unfortunately for Baylor, Blake Shapen, their starting quarterback, will miss time. He has an MCL thing, I believe, that he needs to get checked out. Going to miss 2 to 3 weeks, so he won't be available for the Utah game and a few other ones. So that means Sawyer Robertson is going to come in, who was in the game 6 for 12, 113 yards, did have an interception. I thought it wasn't a terrible interception. I thought he threw it behind his receiver, but I understand the DB was coming over too, so I still thought it was one the receiver should have. But either way, it was turned over. But unfortunately, he did have another pretty crushing turnover later in the game. He scrambled. He had 3 carries for 14 yards. He had a huge carry off to the right. It was a third down, and he was running free. And one of the Texas State players just punched the ball right out, and a huge fumble that crushed any chances of a Baylor late comeback there. So, yeah, that's one of those things where, as I talked about in the first segment, Sawyer Robertson is going to be starting his first ever collegiate game as a starter. Not his first time ever playing, but his first time ever starting against a defense that I think can be one of the best in college football. That looked great in week one. Yes, Utah will have to travel down to Waco, and they are not as accustomed to the heat as a Texas State is. But Utah has much better players than Texas State, and Utah is a much better team than Texas State, and they executed it at a higher level overall still than a Texas State did in this game, even where Texas State did still make mistakes too. And yeah, Utah's offense did slightly, but once again, it's just the talent level at Utah is much higher for what they've accomplished in college football than that Texas State team. So, yeah, I just think Sawyer Robertson, with this experienced secondary, he's probably going to make some mistakes. He's probably going to have a turnover or two, probably an interception. We already saw that Graham Mertz threw one to Utah, which hadn't changed from what he did last year. That's kind of what he did, is threw an interception almost every game, considering he did throw 10. He's thrown 10 the back-to-back seasons. And yeah, I think Robertson's going to turn it over either. He's just not experienced. And this is a defense and a defensive coordinator, especially, who are really good on capitalizing on inexperienced quarterbacks and really getting after them. And the unfortunate thing for Baylor, and the very fortunate thing for Utah, is if you do not have a quarterback who's experienced, you want to have a really stout offensive line, right? The Baylor offensive line was probably the most disappointing part, maybe the defensive line, but I'd say the offensive line was the most disappointing part of the week one performance. At least like if I was a Baylor fan, having watched what I watched, which I watched that game back, I was really not impressed with Baylor's offensive line. Particularly the right side did not perform well against Texas State. And just in general, there's various plays that you can see where every single offensive lineman makes a mistake. And yeah, I guess it happened once or twice to Utah, but Utah had a very good game up front still, I thought. Maybe not a great one because they didn't run the ball super well, but in pass protection, I thought they were outstanding. Baylor was not. They gave up pressure. They just did a poor job being able to establish the running game. I mean, this is a Baylor team that it was against Texas State, and Baylor's known for physical football, right? And Baylor only ran for 108 yards in this game. So, and yeah, they fell behind, so they weren't able to throw it as much as they were probably hoping for, but still just really struggled to establish the run in some key instances. And as I mentioned, in pass protection, especially they got really confused up front. The Baylor offensive line did, trying to pick up blitzes. Rushers came free constantly. And I know one thing that Morgan Scalley is really licking his chops about. I think just like Florida, how I was talking about the Florida running backs be the best part of their offense, it might be their running backs, Baylor again. I do think they actually have some talented receivers. We can talk about that in a second. But even those Baylor running backs, I think they're talented when it comes to running the ball. Number one, the offensive line might not be able to create those holes for them because they could be getting blown up. And number two, that the running backs did not do a good job in pass protection of picking up blitzes. That's something that Utah's big on, right? Having a Mekhi Bernard or Quinton Jackson, whoever's in there has to be a good pass blocking back so they can stay in when you need to. Helping chip for Spencer Fano or just wherever pressure's coming, being able to stand in there, give the quarterback time to make a throw. The Baylor running backs really struggled with that against Texas State. And Utah has stronger blitzers. When you're talking about a Leavani Damuni, a Lander Barton, a Cole Bishop, a Sione Vaki, if they decide to send him. So I think Utah's going to be able to get home even more consistently than Texas State did. And especially on that right side of the offensive line. Their right tackle didn't perform well. If I was Utah, I would line Jonah Ellis over him a lot and have him get to work. And, Van, Logan Fano, I think all those guys are going to be able to get home because, like I mentioned, that Baylor offensive line just really struggled against Texas State. And Utah has better players, better athletes, better pass rushers, whatever you want to say. And the Utah defensive tackles then go in for another dominant performance because the interior of the Florida offensive line is also much more potent than it is at Baylor. And those guys, once again, really struggled with tough competition too. So the one thing I think that will be interesting in this one is the Baylor wide receivers, and I do think they have an athletic tight end too, are capable of coming down with kind of those 50-50 and jump balls, and they're capable of making plays. So that could be something where, look, Utah's not going to shut out Baylor and Waco. I'd be surprised if that happened. So I think when they do score, I think the drive will be because they threw it up top and a JT Broughton or Zamiah Vaughn got beat one play. Once again, that's going to happen. I'm okay with that because as long as for the rest of the game, you're doing your job and you're not getting beat constantly, I understand getting beat is going to happen. And like I said, it's probably going to happen once or twice in this game because of the impressive catches that the Baylor receivers made in week one. But those plays are going to come when Sawyer Robertson just throws it up there. And sometimes when you just throw it up there, Zamiah Vaughn and JT Broughton also capable of getting a pick, also being able to break up that pass too. That's going to happen a lot because I don't know about Robertson. Even when he was converting his 6 for 12 passes, very few of, I don't know off the top of my head now and I watched the game a couple hours ago, I don't remember like one throw where I was like, man, what a dime right there. And it's tough coming in when your team's down, hostile environment, but like a lot of his completions were to wide open receivers, in my opinion. And a lot of it, like outside, there was one over the middle, but there was even the broadcast crew wide open to so-and-so. Like, I don't know if Robertson can operate from the pocket at a high level, especially under duress. And he threw it okay on the move, but he's going to be feeling pressure from all over the place in this game rather than where Texas State would break through only one guy might be able to break in. I think Utah's just got a lot of favorable matchups in this game. And even if Baylor tries to use like the receiver screen game and just like bubble screens, all that kind of stuff, Utah's corners are really physical. They're going to be able to come down. They're going to be able to smoke those receivers and take them down. And they do a good job getting off of receiver blocks. You cannot be a soft corner and play at Utah. Utah corners are very physical. Their DBs in general are. Cole Bishop and Sione Vaki love to get after it against the run. And yeah, I think the Baylor offense does not match up well against this Utah defense at all. I think every position Utah has the advantage at least on paper. And what I saw play out on film, Utah looked much better. Baylor will play better in week 2 because they will be more motivated. They will be just another week of a game week. As Kyle Whittingham said, you make your biggest jump from week 1 to week 2. So they will play better. But I don't know if you can get better enough where you're just shutting down like this Utah team. Even if Utah is going to get fatigued in that heat a little bit like they did against Florida, these athletes are better conditioned and more experienced, much more experience, especially in the front seven than they were in that game a year ago. So going to be something that's interesting to monitor, but I really like the matchups for this Utah defense against the Baylor offense. And it'll be interesting to see if it plays out that way come Saturday. But before we completely turn the book to week 2, we do have to look back at week 1 because multiple Utes were honored for their performances against the Florida Gators. We're going to tell you which Utes in one moment. But first, want to talk to you guys about our friends at UCCU. Learn and Earn, the UCCU mobile banking app that pays your entire family to learn about money. Kids look to parents to become more financially literate. Parents don't always know the answers. Learn and Earn breaks down financial topics into fun, bite-sized educational games like quizzes and trivia. Every time a family member completes a topic, they earn points that occur and can be redeemed for gift cards to stores like Amazon, Apple, Sephora, Walmart, Nike, and so much more. There's age-appropriate content for every member of the family who can compete against each other and track their progress on leaderboards. Learn and Earn is inside the UCCU mobile banking app. So play it anytime, anywhere. The more you play, the more you learn, and the more you learn, the more you earn. Learn and Earn, part of UCCU's award-winning Be Money Smart youth banking program, helping kids, teens, and parents have fun while becoming more financially literate together. UCCU, love where you bank. All right, to close this one out, let's talk about a couple of Utes that earned some honors. First, Satawa Laumea earned a PFF honor when he was named to the PFF Week 1 team. And I think Satawa absolutely deserved this. For those of you who listened to Monday's show, I talked about I watched the game back, and I could find a couple negative plays for pretty much everyone along the offensive line, except for Satawa Laumea. I thought he was fantastic. And I'm not someone who always agrees with PFF. I think sometimes PFF's right. I don't love everything they do, but anytime you're at the top of something, you're doing something correct. And I think that applies here for Satawa Laumea. I thought he was outstanding when I watched the game back. I don't remember him really getting beat for pressure. And we know he's one of the guys in college football when it comes to run blocking. And he went out there and executed at an extremely high level against some very big and physical Florida defensive ends. And this is a Florida team that Princely, they're really prominent pass rusher. I think they did line him up over Fano more the more I think about it. And look, that's not just because Fano was a freshman, but also because it's like, why would we try to test Satawa Laumea, who I think has even shown a lot of improvement from just the games he played at tackle last year. Against Florida, he got beat for a sack, I think, against the Gators last year. So huge shout out to Satawa for being a force up front, one of the leaders along this offensive line, making plays in the running game and providing strong protection in the pass game too. So Satawa once again with a great performance. And right now, Satawa Laumea is this Utah football team's best overall players. ESPN did the ranking, right? They said he's one of the 100 best football players in college football, and I agree. And I think Satawa Laumea plays the right tackle position right now at a higher level than anyone else on the Utah roster does. And Utah has some really good college football players who play their positions at a very high level. But I think Satawa Laumea after week 1 should be considered the best overall Utah football player right now. I know he's not a quarterback, no, he's not a receiver, all those things, but for who does their job at a highest level, I think it's Satawa Laumea. But he wasn't the only one honored with a preseason honor, because also honored was Jack Bomeister, who got honored as the Pac-12 Special Teams Player of the Week. And I think, I forget the stat now, I should have looked it up before, but it's been a long time since Utah had a Pac-12 Special Teams Player of the Week. And it's probably been since Britton Covey, since I say it out loud now, because I'm pretty sure some of those kicks he would have been Pac-12 preseason Player of the Week. But anyways, not preseason, but just Player of the Week. Let's look at Bomeister's stats. He had a 64-yard punt, a 60-yard punt. He had 3 kicks inside the 22. He actually had 2 60-yard punts too. And he was named Special Teams Player of the Week. He flipped the field position for Utah on multiple occasions, mentioned the placement, keeping it inside the 20, trying to pin a team back inside the 20, just where you feel a little more congested because you're close to a safety, and it's just a longer way to go in general. So credit Bomeister for a fantastic season debut. And Coach Whittingham, I think he even said that was the best game he thought he's ever played. So between Bomeister and Cole Becker might have not been honored for Special Teams Player of the Week, but obviously with his 50-yard field goal, I think this is the best we've all felt about the Utah kicking game in the last couple seasons. And I think it's really encouraging going into the rest of the season, where you're going to need your punter to put you in position with good field position, making it harder on the Caleb Williams, the Michael Penix of the world to drive down on the field and score against you, and just making those drives more difficult. And then, of course, Becker, if you need a game-winning field goal, or if you stall at a certain down and distance, you feel much better about who's going to be taking those kicks in general. So it's just great that Utah's in this strong position with their kickers, and great that Jack Bomeister was already named the Pac-12 Special Teams Player of the Week, and reward that was absolutely earned for him, just like Satawa Laumea definitely earned his reward and award, not award yet, but award. As I get all tongue-tied, that's how you know it's time to end the episode. So credit to those Utah players. And that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. On tomorrow's show, really fun one. The new host of Locked On Baylor it joins me. It's Cameron Stewart is, like I said, host of Locked On Baylor. He joins me, and we're going to be doing a special crossover event as we break down the game, talk about if Baylor can win, how Utah's going to operate with Cam Rising or with Nate Johnson and Bryson Barnes in once again, the biggest keys and storylines, and of course, predict it. And also stick around to Friday's show because all your guys' favorite guests that I had on, Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12, is going to be back on the show to talk a little bit of this Baylor-Utah game with me, as well as some other big picture stuff. And I know all you guys didn't love Drake, but I think he does a really good job. I think he always comes prepared into the show. And yeah, like I said, I'm looking forward to having Drake on. And I had a great conversation with Cameron that was already recorded. So we're looking forward to breaking that down. And I'm just looking forward to having you guys check it all out. Let me know what you think. You guys can hit me up at Locked On Utes or at JT Wistcill on Twitter, and also try to get to as many of the comments as I can. So thank you guys, as always, for supporting our show, and go Utes.